Everybody ready? All right. Good evening, everyone. It is 7 p.m. in Hermosa Beach, California, and I hereby call to order our October Planning Commission meeting. As always, we will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance led by Commissioner Hirsch.
All right, please stand. Hand over your heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. May we have the roll call, please?
Commissioner Hoffman,
Here.
Commissioner Flaherty,
Here.
Commissioner Izant,
Here.
Vice Chair Hirsch,
Here.
Chairperson Peterson.
Here. We
We have a quorum.
All right, thank you very much. Next item, approval of the agenda. This is the time for planning commissioners to discuss any changes or requests to change the order of agenda items. Seeing none, do we need to vote on this or can we just move on? Okay, all right. Fantastic. All right, now moving on to public comment. This is the time for members of the public to address the Planning Commission on any items within the Commission's jurisdiction and on items where public comment will not be taken. The public is invited to attend and provide public comment. Public comments are limited to 2 minutes per speaker, and for this portion will only be taken from those present in council chambers. No remote public comment will be taken during this time unless required by the Brown Act. A total of 30 minutes is allocated to this item. No action will be taken on matters raised during public comment, except that Planning Commission may take action to schedule issues raised during public comment for a future agenda. Speakers with comments regarding city management or departmental operations are encouraged to submit those comments directly to the Community Development Director or City Manager's office. Having said that, do we have anyone that wishes to step up to the podium for public comment? All right. Seeing none, I will close public comment and move on to item 6, which is our consent calendar. The following matters will be acted on collectively with a single motion and voted to approve with the majority consent of the Planning Commission. Planning Commissioners may orally register a negative vote on any consent calendar item without pulling the item for special consideration. There is no separate discussion of these items unless a Commission member chooses to remove an item from the consent calendar prior to the vote. Items removed will be considered under a later agenda item with only in-person comment permitted at that time in the chamber. The title is deemed to be read and further reading waived of any resolution or ordinance listed on the consent calendar for introduction or adoption. Does anyone have any comments or wish to pull anything from the consent calendar? I just have one correction, and I'm nervously glancing at the city attorney. There's just a very minor typo on the triennial report. Can I?
Correct. The commission can approve that without pulling it and still approve it via the consent calendar.
If you look on page, I'm going to say it's page 4, where it lists that it was listed, that this was noticed in the Easy Reader. The date says October XX on page 4 under public notification. Is there? I'm sure there's some way to fill that in.
Thank you, Chair. If I could have either Associate Planner Whitney or Planning Manager Oral Peza correct that for the record. That way the Commission has a clear understanding of what that paragraph intended to say. Thank you.
Okay, just for completeness. That's all I have. Does anyone else have any other comments or items they wish to pull? All right, seeing none, could we?
Yeah. Do we have the date?
Yeah, so just to add for clarification for the record, this matter actually is not the public hearing, so there was not a public hearing notice mailed, or, excuse me, published. When this item returns for the next hearing, there will be a publication, but one was not required for this item. So that should have been corrected.
Okay, so that section should just be essentially
Omitted.
deleted or corrected in some way. All right, fair enough.
Yeah, Chair Peterson, I move to approve the consent calendar with the noted deletion.
Second?
Okay, I have a motion, a second. If we could open up the voting on this one.
Voting is open.
All right, voting is in progress.
How do I get, mine's not opening up, or am I using the wrong device?
Should be using this.
Should be using this one? Okay, let's see. That's just plain old.
I don't. Are you in the,
logged in?
are you in the eScribe?
Oh, I'm probably not in eScribe. Okay. Technical difficulties here. Let's go here, we'll go there.
We have 4 votes in so far.
Yeah, so that was the one I clicked on.
Okay.
That's the one I had up.
Orally note.
I vote aye.
And I believe Melanie can do that.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay,
Here, let's try this one.
thank you. Thank you. Motion carries 5-0.
Yeah.
Okay, now on to our public hearings. The first one is item 7A. This is a request to approve a conditional use permit for 138 First Street. Do we have a staff report?
Good evening, Chair, members of the Planning Commission. Before I hand this over to Jake Whitney, I just want to make mention that Jake was recently promoted to Associate Planner, so I'm going to hand it over to him to give the presentation.
All right, thank you. Congrats, Jake.
Congratulations,
Need to
Jake.
upgrade your nameplate there. Noted for the record. Anyway, continue.
Thank you, Chair and Planning Commissioners. As stated, my name is Jake Whitney, and I'll be delivering the presentation for the condominium subdivision at 138 First Street. The request before you this evening, as stated in the agenda, is to approve a conditional use permit and vesting tentative parcel map to allow for a condominium subdivision of a previously approved duplex, and to determine that the project is categorically exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act. The subject property exists currently as a vacant interior lot and has sat empty since 2008, at which time the full demolition was completed of the duplex that existed there previously. That former duplex had fallen into disrepair over the years and was declared to be a public nuisance by the Hermosa Beach City Council in 2006 and was ordered to be removed. The Planning Commission then approved a precise development plan for a new duplex over the summer on July 16th, 2024. Shown above is the city's zoning map to provide additional context showing the location of the property in relation to adjacent streets, zoning districts, and residences. As discussed, the scope of this project is limited to the approval of the conditional use permit and vesting tentative parcel map for the condominium subdivision, as the precise development plan allowing for this 2-unit development has already been approved. The approval of the CUP and vesting tentative map would allow for this duplex to be subdivided and then reclassified as condominiums. Above, you can see the existing site condition of the vacant lot as viewed from First Street. And here you may see the site as viewed from the rear on First Court. As shown above, the project, as proposed, is fully compliant with the additional development standards which are applicable for condominiums, including minimum unit size and private storage space requirements. Moving forward to the impacts of the conditional use permit and vesting tentative parcel map, we are not anticipating any adverse impacts resulting from these approval, as this would only allow for the subdivision of an already approved duplex development. The proposal is consistent with the zoning and general plans along with the city's subdivision regulations. To be more precise, this project has specifically been evaluated for conformance with the Hermosa Beach Municipal Code standards for conditional use permits as identified in Municipal Code Section 17.56.050 and the subdivision standards in Section 16.08.060. The analysis is discussed in greater detail on pages 5 and 6 of your staff reports. Touching upon the general plan, the project has also been evaluated for conformance with various Plan Hermosa goals and policies and was found to be consistent with Goal 1, Policy 1.6 pertaining to urban form, as well as Goal 5, Policy 5.7 pertaining to scenic vistas and light pollution. The project was further evaluated for compliance with the California Environmental Quality Act and was determined to qualify for a Class 3 categorical exemption under Section 15303 for new construction. For the public noticing of the project, 334 mailers were sent to property owners and renters within a 300 square foot radius of the subject site as shown above on October 1st, 2024. And a legal ad was published on October 3rd as well in the Easy Reader. Furthermore, public noticing posters were placed on site a minimum of 10 days ahead of the public hearing in accordance with Hermosa Beach Municipal Code Section 17.68.050. Lastly, this brings us to staff's recommendation. Staff is recommending that the Planning Commission adopt draft resolution 24-19, determining that the project is categorically exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act, and approve conditional use permit 24-10 and vesting tentative parcel map number 84286 for a condominium subdivision of a previously approved duplex at 138 First Street, subject to conditions.
All right, thank you, Jake. Do any commissioners have questions of staff at this time? Looking to my right. No? Looking to my left? Okay. I mean, just to restate what I think is the obvious. So this is to the layperson walking by this as opposed to walking by what we approved months ago. There would be no difference once it's completed. This is, I don't want to say semantics, but it's changing the ownership form and structure of it. But in terms of what's being built, it's virtually identical, if not identical.
Yes, as far as the
physical
end
form of
result
it.
and the physical form, that is proposed to remain the same. This would simply allow for the subdivision of the property and use as condominiums.
Okay, fantastic. Do any commissioners have any disclosures to make? This could include site visits, conversations, or other evidence received before the meeting that is not in the staff report and could affect your decision on the matter. It is generally understood that you have made inquiries of our staff for clarification. I don't have any disclosures. Does anyone else have any disclosures to
Did a
make?
site visit, but spoke to no one?
Site visit?
Okay. Okay, and did you say you spoke to the owner
I
today?
spoke to no one.
Oh, spoke to no one,
Spoke
okay.
to no one.
All right.
Maybe to myself, under my breath.
All right, well, that's expected. Okay, we will now begin the public comment portion of the hearing. All questions and comments on this matter are to be directed to the commission, not the audience. Is the applicant present? Is the applicant on Zoom?
Chair, the applicant is present on Zoom.
Okay, fantastic. If you could admit him to speak, and if you could introduce yourself, sir.
Hi, good evening. My name is Paul Shanasi, and I want to thank you for your time.
Okay, we appreciate that. Do you have any other comments on this? None are required, but we always like to give the applicant a chance to speak if they wish to.
Yeah, honestly, no, nothing is different compared to a couple of months ago, as this was approved for a duplex. The only thing is, it's just gonna change the title from duplex to condo. And I'm here if you guys have any questions to answer any questions.
Okay, fantastic. We appreciate you being here. Is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this item? Seeing no one in chambers, is there anyone on Zoom that wishes to speak on this item?
No hands are raised.
Okay. Throw it back to the applicant one final time. Do you have any further statements in rebuttal, in air quotes, before we close the comment? Any other thing you'd like to share with us? None required, but just offering the opportunity.
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Do any commissioners have further questions of the applicant before the public comment portion of the hearing is closed? No. Okay, seeing none, I will now close the public comment portion of this hearing and bring the matter back to the commission for discussion and deliberation. Who wishes to kick us off? Anyone have any?
I would simply say, as you indicated, not only would the layperson see nothing different, the technical expert would see nothing different. And it's a project we've already approved. It's 100% conforming. This is almost a title change more than anything else. I mean, it's an insignificant, from my perspective, request. So I'll be supporting it.
Okay. Does anybody else have other thoughts on it? I wrote down 2 words, seems okay. So that's the extent of my deep insights. If there's no other thoughts, does anyone have a motion they wish to make on this item?
I'll move staff recommendation.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second to approve staff recommendation, which is to approve the CUP investing tentative parcel map for this condominium subdivision of a previously approved PDP for the duplex at 138 First Street. Last call on discussion, sensing there's none. May we have a vote on this item, please?
Voting is now open.
Okay.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, thank you. Good luck, sir. You're still with us? All right, moving on to item 7B. This is a request to approve a CUP, PDP, and vesting a tentative parcel map to allow a new 2-unit condominium building at 921 Fifth Street. Is there a staff report on this?
Jake Whitney, Associate Planner, will also provide this staff presentation for you this evening.
All right, Jake, it's all yours.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. As mentioned, my name is Jake Whitney, and I'll be delivering this presentation at 921 Fifth Street. The request before you this evening, as stated in the agenda, is to approve a conditional use permit, precise development plan, and vesting tentative parcel map to allow a new 2-unit condominium building, and to determine that the project is categorically exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act. The subject property currently exists as an interior lot developed with a 2,695 square foot single-family dwelling unit. A deed restriction for the property also exists, resulting from a requirement of a 1978 garage setback variance, which limits the property to 1 residence until building permits are obtained to do otherwise. The approval of this project would allow for the property to be developed with the multi-unit project. Shown above is the city zoning map to provide additional context showing the location of the property in relation to adjacent streets, zoning districts, and residences. Regarding the project itself, the applicant proposes to construct a new 2-unit condominium building with Unit 1 totaling 3,448 square feet and Unit 2 totaling 3,898 square feet. Parking for the units will be accessed from 5th Street, where vehicles will proceed down the common driveway leading to each garage. Each unit will have 3 levels with rooftop decks at the top, and the site will be landscaped with 3 Italian alder trees and a variety of shrubs and ground cover vegetation. Above, you can see the existing site condition of the single-family home as viewed from 5th Street. As shown above, the project as proposed is fully compliant with the development standards within the R2B zone as demonstrated on the chart above, such as they pertain to height, lot coverage, open space, and parking. In addition to meeting the development standards within the R2B zone, the project is also compliant with the condominium standards as shown above, such as minimum unit size, private storage space, and minimum required front yard setback. Anticipated impacts from this project and the approval of the CUP, PDP, and vesting tentative map are shown above. Expected impacts are transitory in nature and pertain to construction noise, dust, and vibrations. Approval of this project would result in a net increase of 1 market rate housing unit, which would help the city towards meeting the city's regional housing needs allocation, also known as RHNA. Above you can see the proposed exterior elevations for the rear unit of the property as well as the architectural style. Here you may further see the elevations of the front unit resembling the same style as the rear. And lastly, you may see the elevations for the entire site as shown on the eastern and western sides. Above, you will see the proposed first and second story floor plans for each unit. As discussed, Unit 1 would result in a 3,448 square feet of living area, while Unit 2 would result in 3,898 square feet of living area. Vehicular access from the site comes in from 5th Street, which leads to 2 two-car garages and a shared guest space adjacent to the garage by Unit 2. On the ground floor of each unit are the garages with a hallway leading to a wet bar, living room, bedroom, bathroom, and stairs leading to the floor above. On the second floor of each unit lies the master suites and master baths, laundry rooms, 2 additional bedrooms and bathrooms, and a balcony. Above, you will find the proposed third story floor plan and the roof plan, which identifies the locations of a family room, dining room, office space, powder room, and stairs leading to the rooftop deck as seen above. This project has been thoroughly evaluated for conformance with the Hermosa Beach Municipal Code standards for conditional use permits as identified in Hermosa Beach Municipal Code Section 17.56.050. Precise development plans as identified in Hermosa Beach Municipal Code Section 17.58.030, and subdivisions identified in Municipal Code Section 16.08.060. This analysis is discussed in greater detail on pages 4 through 7 of your staff report. The project has also been evaluated for conformance with the city's general plan and was found to be consistent with Goal 1, Policy 1.6 pertaining to urban form, as well as Goal 7, Policy 7.1 pertaining to permeable pavement. The project was further evaluated for compliance with the California Environmental Quality Act and was determined to qualify for a Class 3 categorical exemption under Section 15303 for new construction. For public noticing of the project, 254 mailers were sent to property owners and renters within a 300 square foot radius of the subject site, as shown above, on September 30th, 2024. And a legal ad was published on October 3rd, 2024, as well in the Easy Reader. Furthermore, public noticing posters were placed on site a minimum of 10 days ahead of the public hearing in accordance with Hermosa Beach Municipal Code Section 17.68.050. Lastly, this brings us to staff's recommendation. Staff is recommending that the Planning Commission adopt Resolution 24-18, determining that the project is categorically exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act, and approve Conditional Use Permit 24-08, Precise Development Plan 24-05, and Vesting Tentative Parcel Map number 84442 to allow a new 2-unit condominium building at 925 Fifth Street in the limited multifamily residential zone, R2B, subject to conditions. Furthermore, following subsequent discussions with the applicant and our Public Works Department, we are recommending that the Planning Commission strike condition number 23 of the draft resolution, as this condition was found to not be applicable. This concludes staff's presentation. We are available to answer any questions you may have. The applicant is also available in the chambers to answer any questions as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jake. Do any commissioners have any questions of staff at this time?
Can Jake save us fumbling through and tell me what the condition is that we're striking? I may find it before he can tell me, but...
So the condition number 23 reads, an easement for and the right to construct, operate, maintain, repair, and use or to reconstruct a utility blanket in nature shall be recorded prior to final map approval.
And
The
Utility blanket.
And can Jake now explain to this poor guy what that...
why was that superfluous?
So the reason why this condition is being requested to be removed is because when it comes to the recordation of the final map, the county takes issue with the language regarding the blanket in nature easement. This condition was also formally used in previous approvals of condos of similar projects with some boilerplate language that was not included in Public Works' comment letter for this project. And
But the point is, there isn't some existing utility easement of an unusual nature on the property or something? I mean, it's just boilerplate that got in by mistake?
Right, this is boilerplate language that wasn't determined to be applicable.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions of staff at this time? Mr. Flaherty?
No, sir.
Kate? Steve? Let me just, as good a time as any, in terms of questions of staff, we did receive a letter or an email from a Peter Puglisi, hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, who is a neighbor that expressed concern about the number of, condos or two on a lot in that neighborhood. I just wanted to address the fact that, or, reiterate, I guess, that this is being developed fully in conformance with the existing zoning, and that existing zoning has been R2B for decades, so we're not granting any special, right to him, nor are we adjusting anything that wasn't already there.
Right, the use is permitted within the zone. The property is also within the density range identified in Plan Hermosa. So it is fully consistent with the zoning and general plan.
And then if I can just add on to it, state law under HAA, which is the Housing Accountability Act, also precludes the city from denying a project based on the density that's permitted within the general plan and zoning unless it finds there's a public health safety and that there's no way to mitigate that impact. Neither of those conditions exist for us to make those findings either.
Okay.
So just-
So the applicant is fully within their rights. We have no basis for adjusting or denying their request. And I know that within that sort of quadrant of town, there are a lot of single-family residents on R2 lots. So I just did want to address that for the record. We have no further questions of staff. Do any commissioners have any disclosures to make, site visits, conversations, or anything other than general inquiries of our staff for clarification? Commissioner Zant?
Drove by the site.
Okay.
None.
Okay.
Site visit?
Site visit.
Okay. A lot of site visits here. All right, we'll now begin the public comment portion of this hearing. All questions and comments on this matter are to be directed to the commission, not the audience. Is the applicant present? If so, please approach the podium to make your presentation. And if you could just introduce yourself and sign in for the record, I'd appreciate it.
Did you want a speaker card as well, or just, no? Okay. Good evening. I am Stacy Strauss from Soror & Associates. Thank you, Chair Peterson and Commissioners, for having us this evening. On behalf of the applicant for 921 Fifth Street, right away, I do want to recognize Jake, our planner, who has been tremendously available during, I think, a time where the city staff is maybe less than desirable, and Jake has been accessible and available and very appreciated. So thank you for all of your guidance on this project. The staff report is very consistent with everything that we applied for and would like to ask for your approval. Just want to point out that, again, there are some community benefits to this project in addition to being the desired development that's envisioned in this part of town, which we appreciate that the neighbor it is adjacent to single-family residences, and I can understand why there may be a question that was raised, but this is very consistent with what the city envisions for this particular lot in this part of town, and it will give us, during a housing crisis, a net gain, additional housing and additional resources for the city. I mean, there'll be tremendous fees paid for schools. There'll be public improvements made for curb gutter sidewalk repair and undergrounding of utilities, et cetera. In addition, though, would like to point out that we're creating street parking with this project by closing up an existing apron and opening up in another location, which creates street parking. And then this project, being a condominium, not just a multifamily, has CCNRs, covenants, conditions, and restrictions that will accompany it, which are quite robust and require the owners of those units to use their garage for their parking only. And that ensures that street parking is for the public and remains for the public. So the community benefit for a condominium is tremendous for the city. And so with that, again, just striking that comment, the component of the resolution that's not applicable, number 23, we would ask for your approval and are in agreement with all other conditions that are proposed.
All right, thank you, Stacy. Do commissioners have any questions of the applicant at this time? No? Seeing none? All right. Stay tuned. Thank you. Is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this item? We'll take anyone in chambers first. You have up to 3 minutes to speak. Does anyone wish to speak on this item? Seeing none. Is there anyone on Zoom call-in that wishes to speak? For up to 3 minutes.
No hands are raised.
Okay. Seeing that, does the applicant have any further insights that they wish to share with us before we close the public comment portion? No. Okay. Okay. Do commissioners have any further questions of the applicant? No? All right. I'll now close the public comment portion of the hearing and bring the matter back to the commission for discussion and deliberation. Who wishes to lead us off? Does anyone have any thoughts or deliberation?
Well, I just wanted to say thank you for clearing up the parking issue on the public right-of-way. It does show the driveway changing from east to west, creating a longer parking area on the east side, or the north side of the street, obviously, and going eastbound. The other thing is the surveys show a little skewed lot line issues from the west side, where there's a gap between an existing new fence and the proposed new driveway. It's still existing right now with an old retaining wall versus a new fence on the other side. I was hoping that during this process, the lot line issues would adjust properly, because even on the east side of the property, it has a skewed lot line with a retaining wall that goes in on one side and comes out on the other when you do the survey. Those are my only comments. I think it's a great asset, as pointed out by the applicant. It looks well. Fifth Street has 4 different zones in that section from PCH to Prospect, all from commercial to R1. So it is confusing, to say the least. The R1s are mainly on the south side of the street, farther east, and the commercial, of course, being farther west. And in between is, I think, both in R2 and R3s. So anyhow, I think this is an excellent example of improvement. That's a very old piece of property, and the newer ones actually show how you can park on site a lot easier. So I certainly would support this application. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Flaherty. Thoughts from other commissioners? Commissioner Hoffman.
I just would reiterate, as Commissioner Flaherty did, it's a fully conforming project, entirely consistent with the zoning, which is not being changed in any respect, and will support the project.
Okay, thank you. I intend to support it as well. As commented, it meets all the requirements for this, not only the zoning, but to the very specifics of height, size, square footage, et cetera. Commissioner Hirsch, do you have any thoughts on this one?
No further comments on this, and I do intend to support this project.
Okay. Commissioner Zand, any thoughts on this?
Chair Peterson, no comments, I'll support.
Okay. Seeing that, is there a motion?
I'll move to approve the project, noting the deletion of item or condition number 23 on the proposed resolution.
Okay, I have a motion on the floor. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, I have a motion from Commissioner Hoffman, a second from Commissioner Flaherty for staff recommendation noting striking one of the conditions. Is there any further debate or discussion on this motion before we move to a vote? No? All right. If we could open up the voting and call the question, Mel, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Voting is open.
All right.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay. Motion carries 5-0. Good luck to the applicant. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy.
All right, moving on to item 7C. This is a request for a zone text amendment regarding ADUs and JADUs. Alexis, could you kick it off for us?
Actually, Community Development Director Carrie Tai is going to provide this for us.
All right, I was reading my cue card here. Wrong way, it turns out. Director Tai, the floor is yours.
Good evening, Chair and members of the Planning Commission. Yes, as a as my contribution to help Planning Manager Earl Peza during this transition period, I took on an item myself. A quick question: is the PowerPoint controlled on your end? I'll just prompt the slides. Thank you. So thank you. Yes, this is a zone text amendment to update the portion of the municipal code, chapter 17.21, that pertains to the regulation of accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units. Slide 2, please. Oh, it's not up, sorry. Okay, well, slide 1 was only the title, so slide 2.
We're catching up.
Sure. Thank you. So this request to amend the accessory dwelling units ordinance stems from two purposes. The primary one is to comply with recent changes in state law, which I'll go over in a second. But as part of the 2-year legislative cycle, the governor signed into law 2 different bills pertaining to the regulation of ADUs and JADUs. And the other secondary reason is through the administration of accessory dwelling unit ordinances, staff has learned a lot about the standardization of regulations as they apply to ADUs in Hermosa Beach, and there are some nuances based on the small size of development in Hermosa Beach that warrant some consideration of some additional flexibility, which I'll talk about, but we have incorporated that into this request. Number 3. So just by way of some background, because accessory dwelling units have been a popular topic in the state legislature, the city has amended the ADU ordinance in 2018, 2020, 2022, and 2023. So that'll make another year. I did mention 2 recent laws. Those are Assembly Bill 2533 as well as Senate Bill 1211. One distinction is that this time around, these bills do come into compliance January 1st, 2025. However, if the local ordinance for ADUs does not comply with the allowances in those state bills, the local ordinances are rendered null and void, which makes it very important that cities put into place updated ADU ordinances that incorporate the regulations as adopted in the 2 state bills. Next slide, please. So Assembly Bill 2533 deals primarily with the legalization of accessory dwelling units. These are units that perhaps were built prior to a certain date. The current state law requires that cities provide a path toward legalization of most ADUs constructed prior to January 1, 2018. Assembly Bill 2533 would update that to include junior ADUs in that provision. And also change the date, move it forward to January 1st, 2020. And it also changes a reference to certain violations that need corrections. Previously, the reference to violations was simply that the violation needed to be corrected for the purpose of safety, health, and welfare. This time, they added a specific state law reference to that, just to make it more specific, the purpose under which a violation that currently exists needs to be corrected in order to legalize either an ADU or a JADU. Next slide. So Senate Bill 1211 has several different topics, one of which is replacement parking. So current ADU regulations say that cities cannot require replacement parking that has been converted to ADUs if it's covered. In other words, if you have parking in a garage, a carport, anything inside a structure, that cities cannot require that you build another structure to replace that. Senate Bill 1211 adds to this that a prohibition that cities also cannot require replacement of uncovered parking. So now if you've eliminated an uncovered parking space on your property in order to construct an accessory dwelling unit, the city cannot require replacement of that uncovered parking space. It has to be allowed to be eliminated. Next slide, please. The second part of Senate Bill 1211 deals with the definition of livable space for ADU conversions in multifamily developments. So previously, multifamily developments could convert something called a livable space to an ADU, but that livable space wasn't defined, and so you had spaces like perhaps laundry rooms and were being converted. The Senate Bill 1211 clarifies that livable space pertains to space that's built for human habitation. And so the way it works is it ensures that the space to be converted was built for purposes of human habitation, and that way when it's converted to an ADU, it goes from human habitation also to human habitation as opposed to something that wasn't originally built to be inhabited by humans. The third portion of Senate Bill 1211 has to do with the number of detached ADUs that you can construct on an existing multifamily development. Currently, the allowance is 2 detached ADUs on a multifamily property. Senate Bill 1211 changes that. It increases that number from 2 to either the number of primary units on the property already or 8 units, whichever is less. So that means if you have a 6-unit multifamily sixplex, somebody could add 6 more, but they couldn't add 8. But if you had 8, you could add up to 8. But if you had 10, you can only add up to 8. So it's the number of primary units or 8, whichever is less. So Senate Bill 1211 does those 3 things. So moving off of the state legislative bills, I did mention 2 locally observed conditions that staff is going to request changes to the ADU ordinance to allow for consideration of Hermosa Beach's somewhat unique development pattern. So the first pertains to height limits for detached ADUs. And this is for single-family properties, and this is a detached ADU is currently limited to 16 feet high, except for if you're within a half mile of high-quality transit. And that high-quality transit was recently relaxed so that more of the city is now within the area within a half mile of high-quality transit. And in those cases, you would be allowed 18 feet. In addition, you could be allowed 2 additional feet either on top of 16 or on top of 18 if you had to incorporate architectural features to match the main house. So let's say the main house has a pitched roof and you were building a detached ADU where you also wanted to match the pitch of the roof and you needed extra height to accommodate that. That additional 2 feet would allow you to do that. Given that the ultimate height limit would be 20 feet if properties were within a half mile of high-quality transit, which represents, I would say, about half the city at this point because the high-quality transit is along the Pacific Coast Highway corridor. Probably 75% of the city, actually. Staff is recommending that the Planning Commission consider changing the height limit for detached ADUs to 20 feet in all situations. This is still lower than all of the residential height limits. So R1 is 25 feet currently, and R2 and R3 are both 30 feet. So in no case would this allow anything to exceed the current height limit. And as a reminder, attached ADUs can already go to the height limit of the zone. So this just pertains to detached. The second staff request has to do with building separation. Next slide, please. Currently, the city's municipal code has several different sections that pertain to building separation. In the R1 and R3 zones, all habitable structures are required to be separated by 8 feet from each other. But in R2 and R2B, and actually R2A as well, they're required to be separated by 6 feet. And so this would mean that any detached ADU in those zones would have to be separated by that amount. This creates a challenge for a lot of the single-family lots. Actually, not even, I'm sorry, it's lots occupied either already by one home that have limited space, simply because the size of Hermosa Beach's lots are relatively small compared to a general average. And so the siting of a detached ADU and having to meet those building separation requirements means potentially a smaller unit than otherwise could be accommodated. So staff is proposing that for ADUs, recommending to rely on the building code for building separation. The building code for traditional construction normally allows for 6 feet. However, if certain kinds of construction methods are used, that can be decreased, and that's for the purpose of fire separation. So we recommend, allowing additional options for people to have their structures a little closer together, but they would have to take the appropriate construction methods to ensure that it meets the building code. So that concludes the list of amendments incorporated in the zone text amendment. This zone text amendment was evaluated per the California Environmental Quality Act, and there is this statutory exemption that provides an exemption to CEQA for when jurisdictions are adopting an ordinance for the purposes of allowing JADUs and ADUs. Next slide for public noticing. This project or request was noticed in the Daily Breeze on October 3rd. And then the staff recommendation would be for the Planning Commission to find that adoption of a proposed ordinance would be statutorily exempt under CEQA, and to adopt a resolution recommending that the City Council adopt the proposed ordinance, implementing the changes that I've described. And in your attachment, as a reminder, the typical format for when a zone text amendment is forwarded to City Council, it's in the form of a resolution with the draft ordinance attached. And then we would take the draft ordinance to council at the next available opportunity, with the goal of completing the changes by January 1 or as soon as possible, so that the city's ADU ordinance remains in effect. That concludes my presentation, and I can try to answer your questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Director Tide. Do any commissioners have questions of staff at this time?
I got a ton of them, but.
Okay, have at it.
First of all, I thought the staff report was excellent. I enjoy the fact that you added the assembly bills, the red line, and the ADU, JADU information. And you did clear up for me the 8-foot versus 6-foot. So 6 foot is what you're recommending, I assume.
We're actually recommending, thank you for that question, we're actually recommending to defer to the building code.
Okay.
But I wanted to clarify that just for traditional wood frame construction, that's, regular framing, regular drywall, that is typically a 6-foot separation. However, there are building code or building construction methods that have additional fireproofing that would allow for reduced building separation. And that is allowed by the building code, which is why we would like a blanket referral directly to the building code, so that the owners have additional options to consider.
Okay. Next question is, the 20-foot height that you're proposing, does it exceed the state numbers, or is it within the state numbers? There was a 18-foot at one time. There was other height previous to that.
Yeah, thank you for that. So the current limits for detached ADUs are taken verbatim from the state limitations. And in certain situations, yes, 20 feet would be higher than what is allowed today. In certain situations, so if you had a detached ADU that was not within a half mile of high-quality transit, it could only be 16 feet, but if it wanted to match a primary unit that had a pitched roof and it needed 2 additional feet, it could go up to 18. So that's what's allowed under state law. However, given that most of the city, under the new definition of high-quality transit, is going to be within the area that allows for 18 feet of height, and then they could have the additional feet of 20 for architecture, Staff is just recommending that for simplicity for property owners, that height limit for detached ADUs just simply be made to be 20 feet.
Okay. Throughout the document, especially the red line document, it illustrated minimum sizes for including the ADU and the JADU. So there were square footages that some of them said 1,200 feet, some said 850, some said 800. Could you clarify that? And I know some of that particular question isn't necessarily the newest laws. There's some of they're existing.
All right, so I'm going to see if I can do this. So first of all, for a junior ADU, they are always only up to 500 square feet.
Right.
If it's over 500, it automatically is not a junior ADU. Now, Commissioner Flaherty, you're asking about the current size limits for accessory dwelling units. I think we have, it's 800 and 1,000. Those are maximum sizes. It's 800 for, hold on, I'm just scrolling through my red line here, I apologize.
There is a page that says 1,200,
Which page are you on? I'm
and
sorry.
I'm going to look at it
Okay,
right
thank
now.
you. So I have the maximum size of, 850 square feet for a studio and 1,000 square feet for an ADU with 2 or more bedrooms. And now I'm going to.
I'll have to come back to you. I should have marked it down, but there was a 1,200 square foot number on one of these pages.
Sure. Let me just,
I'll get back to you
I'll
on
search
that.
for it.
Last question is the staff is recommending the 95 versus the 64 units in one of the documents. And tell me why we want to go with 95 versus 64. Let me get that page.
I'm going to need a little more.
I'll get back to you on both of those as we go through this.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. This is in reference to the, thank you, City Attorney Donegan. This is in reference to the housing element program to facilitate the construction of accessory dwelling units. Accessory dwelling units are part of the suite of solutions to meet the city's RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Assessment Allocation. And based on the city's existing trend of ADU creation, the city was averaging about 8 units per year, and the planning periods for housing elements are 8 years. And so, so the city's realistic forecast was 64 dwelling units to go towards satisfying the RHNA. Where the 95 comes from is that HCD, the State Housing and Community Development Department, was looking for ways to promote something called housing mobility. And it means increasing choices for housing in more areas. One of the ways to increase housing mobility in traditionally single-family neighborhoods and single-family zones is the creation of ADUs. And so the city's ADU program commits to facilitating the creation of ADUs as a way of increasing housing mobility to allow additional people, additional groups of populations to start moving into single-family homes by way of ADUs. And so the estimated increase in ADU creation would be about 31 units, which brings it up to 95.
Okay.
And that also goes towards satisfying the city's RHNA.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Pete, do you have any? I think you deferred. Okay. Vice Chair Hirsch.
Yes, thank you. I have a clarifying question based on the presentation. It triggered a question for me. So I understand that SB 1211 creates a definition for livable space. and it defines that livable space can't be boiler rooms and storage rooms. And I believe it also says that garages can't be considered livable space. But SB 1211 also, as I understand it, says that conversion of garages prior to 2020 will not require any replacement parking. Am I understanding that correctly? So on one hand, it's saying you can't consider a garage conversion as an ADU, and on the other hand, it's saying prior to 2020, if you converted your garage, you don't have to replace the parking?
Thank you, Vice Chair Hirsch. I'm going to see if I can follow that. So there are different regulations at play here. So traditionally, a garage is not considered a habitable space until you legally convert it to one. And so, however, under the guise of parking, yes, if you convert it properly, the city cannot require that you then build another garage. As part of SB 1211, they changed the definition for multifamily dwellings to mean livable space. No, sorry. For multifamily properties, they changed hold on. The change in livable space applies to this converted ADUs inside a multifamily dwelling for actually a reason. Because what you have is, if you have, some of the 100-unit multifamily buildings that have a large garage structure, the clarification was intended to clarify that you can't convert those types of structures. So if you're talking about a garage in a single-family home, it's in a different category from a conversion of livable space, and I'm using air quotes here, livable space in a multifamily property. So while the definitions sound like they overlap, this is intended to apply to large multifamily dwellings where you can't just build out like a large parking structure and make it into ADUs. And by virtue of not being able to convert that brings moot any point about replacement. Now, going back to when you have a small-scale development where you have, a single-family home with a garage and you convert the garage, simply that just says, the building code will make sure that garage is able to be inhabited by humans. And that means it has to meet drainage, insulation, heat, and all of those elements. And it also means that the zoning code will prevent cities requiring the property owner to replace that parking space. So they apply to like two different situations, even though they sound like they overlap. So I hope that cleared things up a little.
Yeah, I think that the thing that I missed was the multifamily component. So I was thinking single family and reading it. So thank you for that clarification. I think that's it for now.
All right, thank you, Vice Chair. Commissioner Izant, do you have any questions?
Not at this time.
All right, back to the chair. Does the chair have questions? Walk me, I was sort of doing some mental math and trying to figure out, so for an ADU, there's a size limitation on an ADU. So when we're talking about like a 20-foot high, like is that feasible? Like would we see ADUs that are 20 feet high, and what would the footprint of the building look like?
One of the primary limitations of the existing 16-foot height limit was limiting two-story ADUs. Okay. And when we have very small lots, that, limiting, when you have, you only have 16 feet, you're basically limited to 7-foot some odd level ceilings, right? And so that was one of the challenges. But with the small lots, if you're able to go up to 20 feet, you can do a two-story ADU with a footprint. Let's say you're doing an 850 square foot ADU. Your footprint's going to be 400 and change.
Okay.
because you're able to go 2 stories, versus if you
So
couldn't,
that's-
your footprint would be 800, or more likely, you wouldn't have 800 square feet of space plus the building separation, so you'd end up with a smaller ADU, which then decreases the probability of, the selection of family sizes and people that could live there.
Okay. And then I know one of the challenges is sort of in interpreting what's envisioned in Sacramento to our small, welcoming little town here. So when I was reading that whole thing about the 8 units and the 6 units, and like, does that really apply here? Like, or where would that apply? Like, you can, one per every, the question.
Yeah, no, that's a great
One per every existing
question.
unit. I was trying to visualize where in town that would happen, or is
Yeah,
that just sort of?
It could happen at any multifamily development that has more than 8 units and that perhaps has extra space on the property where you could accommodate detached ADUs. Maybe there's a courtyard, for example, or some kind of space that maybe isn't otherwise required for requisite open space. But ultimately, the 8 is a state law number that we just have to accommodate if and when that situation ever comes up.
Okay, so if you had this multi-unit facility with ample grounds, you could put in 8 more units, but it sounds like it's more conformance with the state law than something that's likely here.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, as written, state law says you have to allow as many detached ADUs as the number of primary units, up to 8. But if you were to apply that hypothetical situation to the city's current ADU ordinance, we wouldn't have a way to accommodate that. And because we don't have a way to accommodate that, we would not comply with that state law by January 1st, and that would invalidate the city's whole ADU ordinance, right? So we have to accommodate it, even though for a built-out community with very few large multifamily properties that might have capacity to do this, we still have to be able to accommodate that hypothetical situation.
Okay, and then one final question, probably an unfair one, but I'm thinking back to these are the best ones. I'm thinking back a few months ago, there was that apartment building on PCH that was then using some existing parking space or carports to build 3 ADUs, which was not part of our deliberation because that was under state law, but it was worth noting that they took essentially 3 carports and turned them into small ADUs. I'm greatly truncating their plans with my one sentence. But trying to visualize that in the context of this, does anything change in terms of doing that, or how was that done under state law? Because we were just talking about carports and garages and livable space, and I'm just trying to understand how this applies, and if you want to know, quote me, you can, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, sure.
Since that was a recent debated issue.
Yeah, I remember the project, but unfortunately, I don't remember exactly which spaces they were using to create the additional units. I know there was an L-shaped swimming pool that in part was being modified. But
Right.
beyond that, I don't know if Planning Manager Oropeza, if you have a better recollection than I do.
I recall the indoor-outdoor area that was being converted, and then there was a storage area. I don't remember if there was a garage on that one. Sorry.
Okay, that's fine. I'm just always trying to kind of bring this to our context. All right.
If I could, I'd like,
Yeah, go
Mr.
ahead.
Chair,
Yeah, absolutely.
just so for clarify for everyone, so we've got dozens of, say, 6, 8-unit apartments all over the city, some of which have adequate parking, some of which have 2 or 3 garages. In other words, just for the sake of clarification to everyone that may be listening, if I have a 6-unit apartment that has 3 garages, let's say on the ground floor, can I convert those into 3 new ADUs? Can I, in other words, turn my 6-unit building into a 9-unit building
So given,
without parking?
sorry. Yeah, so given Well, those are two different questions, but given that the definition of livable space now clarifies that livable space clarifies that it's for human habitation, and that applies to conversion in multifamily ADUs. Based on that, I don't believe you could convert I don't think you can convert livable space, which is defined as something that has to be inhabited by humans, which garages are not, to ADUs.
I just.
And so
Yeah, no,
Further
that's it.
elaborate,
I don't think
just so
you could do
everybody's
that.
clear.
But under the scenario of detached ADUs, you could construct additional ADUs on the property if you had the space and also the building separation, whatever that ends up being. You would have to have enough horizontal available space for that.
Right.
Good question. Yeah, I mean, as to our viewing public, yeah, just trying to understand these statewide mandates and how they fit into our little town. And just one final comment on the 6 foot and 8 foot separation. 6 foot seems to make sense because if you build here, you can have 3 foot setbacks. Like I'm 6 feet from my neighbor's house. So again, it just seemed like a consistency item that made sense.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. This is a public hearing, so if I'm following along correctly, we should now begin the public comment portion of the hearing. Is that correct? Does anyone from the public wish to speak on this item? We'll first go in chambers, and then if people wish to zoom in on this, they can. I'll call on them next. So does anyone from the public wish to step up to the podium and address this item? Going once, going twice, all right. Not seeing anyone. Is there anyone on Zoom that wishes to speak on this item?
No hands are raised.
Okay, dramatic pause. We will now close the public comment portion of this hearing and bring it back to the commission for deliberation. Does anyone wish to kick us off?
I'll go.
All right, Commissioner Flaherty?
Again, I want to thank you again for the staff report, the redlining, the articles. I forgot to ask you one question. There was a reference in here about section 66341, which is the ability of the property owner to sell a ADU. Could you give me more? I couldn't find it in any of your staff reports. Is it a separate document within our code, or is it just a state code that you refer to? And it's a direct reference on how the law was adjusted or changed, where neither, at one time, neither the ADU or the JADU was able to be sold. There was also some issues with ownership and who lived in each, were they relatives, and those have all been addressed by additional state law. But this one was very specific, where it allowed the ADU under section 66341 as illustrated in your report.
So that's if I might attempt to answer that. That is a government code section. There is an allowance when an ADU is built by a qualified nonprofit organization like Habitat for Humanity, and in which case they would be able to sell the ADU.
But there is no reference to the property owner currently to be able to separate that property and sell it as an individual house.
Correct.
Thank you. Okay, so now the deliberation is, I totally respect the city's obligation to follow state law, and I thought your staff has put together a great report. Some of the words such as encourage that it's in the document kind of throw me back a bit, because from the very beginning when I was on this commission in 2012, when it first appeared, there wasn't a person in the room that didn't think it was not correct for the city of Hermosa. It was not going to work out. I don't think the city should be anything but following the direction of what the state has to do. But I'm a little confused and concerned that we encourage ADUs. But I haven't lost my distaste for this, but I am certainly more than willing to follow your direction and comply with state law. I think this is a horrible idea for the city of Hermosa. I don't think one size fits all in these state legislative directions, but I think you've done an excellent job of guiding us through this, so I will support with less than, what was the word? Encouraging thoughts. So thank you.
All right, so noted. Commissioner Hoffman.
Well, it's interesting because once again, Commissioner Flaherty has looked over at my own notes, as he does so often. There's two different things really we're looking at. The first is, do we want to be in conformance with state law? Well, of course, we got to do that. The second two items, though, bring me back to what now has become a moving target here. We disagreed, let me correct myself. I disagreed with the idea that the ADU model made sense in our city. The director tonight has multiple times said the small size of our lots, the small size of this. She's left out the density and the bulk, not by mistake, but simply in the time that I've been on this commission, no one has ever come into this chamber and said, I wish we had less parking, I wish we had greater bulk, I wish we had higher, none of those things have ever been expressed. And yet the state has effectively, I was going to say coerced, not coerced, forced us, have required us to accommodate state mandates that were, remember, this was allegedly going to increase the affordability of housing. That concept has gone out the window, as the director commented. Now we talk about residential mobility to increase people's choices. The choice in Hermosa is never going to be an affordable property. The choice in Hermosa is going to be now a range of newer sizes, but they're all going to be expensive. To me, if we approve the higher height limit, for example, in addition to simply increasing the bulk of ADUs, or potentially the bulk of ADUs, you're increasing the price of that. And so to me, it's counterproductive with what was the initial goal of this. Initial goal of ADUs was to make housing more affordable. Well, now if I can have an ADU with a 20-foot ceiling in the entrance, and I can have 2 stories, and I can have a deck on top, and I can do all the rest of those kinds of things, that's doing nothing to save or to address this. So I would be opposed to that. I appreciate the compelling reason that, given the small size lots, but what you're saying is, since I can't increase the bulk, I'm going to try and increase the height. I'm opposed to that part of this, or that proposal of this. And then the second item, the 6-foot or 8-foot, again, the goal or the original intention of that was to try and preserve open space, to minimize bulk, in some cases, not to protect, but to maintain at least existing view corridors where they exist. I'm one of those folks in town, like many of us, that if I lay just right with my head on the pillow and turn my head just right, I can see a glimpse of the ocean. But if we increase the bulk and we increase the height, that'll go away. And I'm not defending my own situation. So the consistency thing, the goal of what we're trying to accomplish, yes, we have to be in conformance with the state requirements. I'm not sure that I agree that we need to go 20 feet. I appreciate the rationale that the director has proposed. I think I disagree on that. The 6 or 8 foot, I think, again, the reason that we did that, the way we did that, especially for the R1 lots, recognizing that on the R2 lots, where you're going to have 2 condos, very little chance of that being an issue to begin with. So I'm still unsettled. I hope my fellow commissioners will persuade me one way or the other on that item. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Vice Chair Hirsch.
Thank you. You know, I share the concerns of my fellow commissioners in terms of changing the language around the height. It seems like per state mandate, and it sounds like per state mandate, and more specifically how the code is currently written, it is trying to minimize the bulk of detached ADUs, and then also minimize just the opportunity to go up 2 stories. So I think that changing that language to make it more streamlined is potentially creating more issues than the ones that it's solving. And the other comment I had was with regards to the timing of recording the deed restrictions associated with permits for these ADUs. As it's currently written, and I'll reference section number 17.21.040, item G. And which I'm not actually looking at, so I'm hoping my notes are right. It's currently requiring that to be issued and approved prior to issuance of a building permit. And the suggestion is to change it to prior to issuance of certificate of occupancy. And I would just have, did I cite the wrong? Okay, I would just have a concern around permits potentially just being left open and not finalized and illegally occupied without having that deed restriction put in place. So I guess I open that up as a comment and also a question for clarification if there was a reason behind changing the timing of that restriction.
Sorry. Yeah, yes, thank you for that question. One of the things that, a couple things happen when we are looking at deed restrictions. One is the property owners often want to get the project moving, and since it takes so long to construct something, they can prepare the paperwork prior to us finaling that building, which that would be the certificate of occupancy. When you require it prior to the building permit, you're recording a deed restriction on something that isn't in place yet, and so typically there is some complications. That's one reason. The second reason is every single time we update the accessory dwelling unit ordinance, we work very closely with the city attorney's office on the most recent version of all of the typical ordinances, and the certificate of occupancy timing has sort of become the standard. So we are putting that in as a recommendation because practically it has worked better on the ground, but it's also something that's being practiced more often. So we are presenting it for the Planning Commission's consideration. In all honesty, I don't think this is a mandated timing. I don't think this is a mandated timing, if I can say that. So thank you.
That's it for me.
All right, Commissioner Arzant.
Thank you, Chair Hoffman. I do want to go back because I am sensitive to the issue of height, and I appreciate the director's observation that whether it's 16, 18, or 20, it's in a zone that has a maximum height for the primary building of 25 feet in an R1 zone or 30 feet in an R2 or R3. But going back to just the issue of 20 feet, the language that's being redlined out was it was 18 feet if it was within 1/2 walking distance Is that 1/2 mile, or what's a 1/2 walking distance? How is that defined? 1/2 mile, okay. It just says 1/2 walking distance. And then there was the exception of 2 additional feet if the primary residence had a pitched roof as opposed to a flat roof. So in our situation now, it doesn't matter whether it's within a 1/2 mile of a transit stop or whether the primary roof is pitched or whether it's flat. It's just ADUs can be 20 feet high. Do I have that correct, or have I missed the nuances?
That, you have that correct to summarize the staff proposal. That's what, because it's just for simplicity of administration. So staff is proposing that, yes.
Yeah, I guess I'm somewhere between Commissioner Flaherty and Commissioner Hoffman on complying with state law and so on. But on the other hand, I don't want to give away anything either. And so if we can still be in compliance with state law and it's 18 feet or 16 feet and we're still in compliance, I'd rather do that than just a blanket 20. And that's my only comment. Other than that, thank you again for a good job of all this stuff that nobody wants to deal with.
All right. In terms of my thoughts on this, obviously a big chunk of this is conforming with state law, noting some of the challenges of myself and our colleagues in terms of, fitting this into a town that's one of the densest in the state. What we have to do, we're doing. I appreciate that. I was sort of, reading through this last night and trying to understand some of the nuance of the 16 versus 18 by 20. I do, and Pete's better at thinking through this than me. I do think that I'm swayed by his argument. If the point of this is to have a sort of, buffet of different sizes and shapes and characters of units, and if we take 1-story houses and turn them into 2-story houses, we're exiting a lower price point for the sake of square footage, but it's a higher priced. I mean, it's an ADU that would have been 1-story and smaller at a lower price point or entry point that's now bigger and more expensive. So given that, I'm swayed by his argument, which I think is also agreed to by Commissioner Izant. So those are my thoughts on this. I appreciate my fellow commissioners weighing in on this, noting that we each have some challenges in terms of the state strategy, but we also have limited degrees of freedom. So does anyone else have any other thoughts on this? I saw a hand raised to my right.
I do.
Okay.
Just one follow-up on Commissioner Hurst's statement about the building process and timing on page 4 of the red line document, number 8C. I'm sorry, it's not 8. It's, C under page 4, process and timing. It does say it's not redlined, so obviously this is state law already, and that's what we had on the books right now. It does say that the permit has to be completed by the city within 60 days or the applicant gets it, period. So that's not even close to what normal applications have taken throughout the other building process. I think this is a little heavy-handed. Is that a state law or is it, okay. So is there exceptions to that at all?
No, that is, I mean, there are exceptions written under, if you're looking at page 4, under subsection 2A and 2B. Those are built-in exceptions. Exception number 1 is if the applicant requests the delay. And number 2 is if the ADU or ADU is submitted in conjunction with a new single-family or multifamily dwelling on the
Okay.
lot. And so then the timing defers back to the rest
Regular
of the
permit.
queue. But otherwise, the expedited timing of 60 days and so on and so forth is state mandated.
Is there any other process that we have a time frame? I don't know of any,
I think EV chargers, solar panels, there's certain things
Yeah.
that have.
Wireless facilities.
Wireless, yeah. Thank you, Pat.
okay, well, thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Well, we've certainly shared our thoughts on this. Does anyone wish to make a motion on this item?
I'll move staff recommendation, striking the language that would affect the change in height, leave that the way it is, but make the amendments necessary to conform with the state, and change the separation as noted.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. So when you mention separation, that's the 8 feet versus 6
The 8
feet?
versus 6,
Okay.
right? So make that
Is
standard.
everyone clear on the motion?
Wait, so-
If I could ask a clarification, so the staff recommendation is to defer to the building code, but if the commission wanted a straight 6 feet, we can do that too. It's just a matter of streamlining it so it's more transparent and simple.
But so I believe that you just want it to remain the way it is, that there's the 8-foot separation
8
in the
feet.
single family and then the 6 feet, or did you want a blanket?
I would go with the 6 feet unless that's obviously conflicting with the building
it.
code. But I'm assuming that if someone were, and I'll be honest, I don't know the code, but as the chair mentioned, or the director mentioned, there's construction techniques to deal with that as there is with an attached garage and so forth. So,
Correct.
yeah, I guess what I'm saying is I don't want to change the height. Otherwise, I am proposing that we move staff recommendation to go with building code.
Understood. Thank you for
Okay.
the clarification.
Okay, so we have,
Commissioner Isaac, did agreement with that? Oh, I'm sorry.
no, that's fine.
Yes, the second concurs.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Does anyone have any further clarifying questions on the motion or any points of discussion on it?
Yes, one clarifying question. I just couldn't hear the
the jet
motion over the IT. The motion was
The
to
airplane taking off?
move the staff report with the exception of the height limit only, not the setback change.
Correct.
Okay,
Separation, right.
thank you.
Okay, fair enough. Is there any further debate on the motion on the floor, the seconded motion on the floor? All right, if not, I'll call the question. If we could open voting on this.
Voting is open. Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 8, staff items. This is a study session to discuss the citywide rezoning approach. Director Ty, or? All right, you two, all right.
Good evening, Chair. Before I get started with the study session, I wanted to make mention that while public hearing notices are not required for study sessions, we customarily send out an e-blast to the interest group that has signed up for zoning code updates. That was, an oversight was made and that was not distributed. However, we've legally met the minimum requirements and that this was posted on the agenda a minimum of 72 hours in advance.
Okay.
This study session is largely review of prior components. However, I wanted to give the commission the option of whether or not to postpone this to November meeting or to proceed with the conversation this evening.
Any thoughts from my peers?
My only thought is there's, what, 4 people here, 3 of whom are regulars, as it were. I'm wondering if the lack of notice had any impact on that. I'm not sure that folks appreciate where we are. It's been so long since we started, the quote-unquote new general plan is hardly news anymore. I lived through ZORP, as they called it, in Manhattan Beach, and we filled the chambers in those days, so I don't know. Wasn't that what it was? It was ZORP, zoning ordinance, I can't remember. It
Yeah,
was one of these.
ZORP. You brought me back for a
That's
minute.
right, one of those crazy acronyms.
All right.
That- Chair, let me ask a question of council. We have had some citizens that became aware of this that have come to offer comment. Is this one of these things that that we could take comment tonight and with the vote of the commission continue it to November with proper noticing?
So this is a study session, so it's not,
Right.
it wouldn't be a decision point. And so there will be subsequent opportunities for further input and discussion as well. In other words, having the discussion tonight doesn't hurt, if that helps.
And then, but once again, to answer your question, if there are any concerns about notice, you guys are free to hear, of course, the comments from the constituents here, and then do as you deem fit as the Planning Commission. But as Madam Director explained, legally, you guys are good to go with really either option.
Thank you, council. Chair, I'd recommend proceeding.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, this is sort of a refresh on a topic that, there's greater context in terms of our timeline and, getting this done. But I would like to proceed with this. So if we could first receive the presentation and then we'll hear public comment and then some debate from up here. So,
Great, thank
Yeah.
you. I just wanted to disclose that for full transparency. So this is a study session, as we've discussed. And tonight, we're going to talk about the zoning code update process. I'll give you some background on that first, and then I'll give you an overview of the general plan land use, specifically the designations that have been proposed, and the general plan, which serves as the backbone for this zoning code update titled In the Zone. And we'll go over some of the rezoning approach that's been planned. The zoning code update work program, as mentioned, is founded on the city's general plan titled Plan Hermosa, which was adopted in 2017. In 2020, the city completed an assessment report outlining areas of Title 16 for the subdivision ordinance and Title 17, the zoning ordinance, that needed to be revised in order to be consistent with Plan Hermosa. Work began in 2021. The Planning Commission conducted a series of special meetings weighing in on proposed zone changes throughout 2022. Between 2021 and 2023, several zoning initiatives were completed, ranging from off-street parking to short-term rentals. The off-street parking zoning code amendments were a part of the larger comprehensive update, but were separated to expedite its implementation. In 2023, the city prioritized the housing element update to meet state mandates and requirements of the California Housing and Community Development Department in its efforts to get a certified housing element. As part of those efforts, the following zone text amendments which were also intended, many of them were intended to be part of the comprehensive zoning code update, were adopted. And these included revisions to the regulations for mixed-use development, creation of the housing sites inventory overlay, objective findings, the revised regulations for M1 light manufacturing zones, and the creation of building design guidelines, as well as the creation of land value recapture. This past August, these zone code amendments became effective with the certification of the housing element by HCD. The zoning code update, to focus on the comprehensive zoning code update, restarted earlier this year, and the commission held a series of study sessions. At its June 18th meeting, the Planning Commission recommended approval of the administrative procedures component of the zoning code update. During this meeting, we also reviewed commercial land uses, and at that time, it became apparent that revisiting some of the underlying general plan land use designations was important because it does serve as the foundation for any rezoning that we will undergo as part of the zoning code update. The general plan establishes the long-term vision of the future, as you know, for the development of the city. As adopted, Plan Hermosa includes 4 broad land use categories: residential, commercial, creative, and institutional land use categories. These 4 categories are further divided into 13 land use districts. Over the next 2 slides, I will share with you a table summarizing the land uses, characters, designations, definition of the use, and the development density and intensity that would be permitted. This first table displays the proposed residential land use designations and indicates the maximum development intensity for properties with this designation in terms of dwelling units per acre. And the next table provides you with all of the non-residential land use designations and includes the established maximum development potential for non-residential properties, which in this case is expressed as floor area ratios. The general plan provides an expanded definition and purpose statement for each land use designation, describing the intended development for each area. The proposed citywide draft rezoning largely mirrors the boundaries and nomenclature of Plan Hermosa's land use designation. The draft zoning includes 14 zones and to implement Plan Hermosa's 13 land use designations, and there's a crosswalk table included as attachment 3 of the staff report. This next slide provides you with kind of a focused view of the gateway land use designation, which was brought up during the June meeting. So this, and here I've highlighted the property at PCH and Pier. It's outlined in black, and that gateway land use district is in purple. The gateway land use designation is meant to be located at key entryways and intersections as it's defined by Plan Hermosa. It aims to provide a variety of employment, retail, economic activities, and include mixed uses, such as residential uses. The development intensity ranges from 1 to 2 for FAR. For this next slide, we're going to look at, actually, can I move it? Oh. Sorry, delay. Okay, here we go. Okay, so the community commercial land use designation is shown in pink on the map, and I have highlighted the property located at northeast corner of PCH and Anita Street. Community commercial designation was created to provide opportunities for shopping and dining, primarily located along the city's major corridors in downtown, and it offers a development intensity ranging from 0.5 to 1.25. And in your attachments, you have an excerpt from Plan Hermosa, which includes all of the various land use districts and their established purposes and land uses. So staff is seeking feedback as to whether or not the areas, the land use categories align with the vision and location as to where they've been assigned, and whether any of those should be reconsidered at this time. Zoning, as you know, is one of our tools that puts the general plan into action. by establishing the specific uses allowed and development standards for individual properties. The proposed citywide rezoning closely follows the boundaries and names, as mentioned previously, for Plan Hermosa. The rezoning effort also includes overlays. Overlays are in addition to the base zoning regulation and can apply to varying geographic areas. Overlays are used to address a site-specific area need. The overlays proposed would be open space, a coastal zone overlay, as well as the housing element overlay, which was adopted in November last year as part of the housing element. While zoning districts must be compatible with the general plan land use districts, they are not required to be identical and need not implement all aspects of a land use designation. However, all zoning regulations must be within the general plan's allowed intensity. The proposed open space overlay would address the unique development of our walk streets, providing pedestrian access to the coast. The coastal zone overlay is proposed to implement our obligations for properties in the coastal zone, implementing the Coastal Act. And then, of course, the housing element overlay is implemented to help us achieve our regional housing needs assessment assigned numbers, in order to achieve our regional housing needs assessment capacity, the city had to update general plan land use designations to incorporate residential uses in a number of commercial land use districts, including community commercial, gateway, service commercial, creative light industrial, and public facilities. Currently, mixed use commercial and residential uses are allowed in the C1 zone and on sites with the housing element overlay. The zoning code update must include objective development standards for all proposed zoning designations to implement these residential districts. With regards to residential uses in commercial areas, staff is seeking guidance from the Planning Commission on whether or not residential uses should be allowed above the ground floor on areas within the downtown that are not an inventory site. I have on this slide the area that is in the downtown area and is not on an inventory site is outlined in the dashed area. So the question here is, should residential be allowed there on the above ground floor only? And then this question we would like input on is whether that should be extended to any other corridors. Should we be prioritizing commercial on the ground floor where residential is allowed in commercial districts? So that brings us to what our next steps are. So we'd like to get feedback from the commission on these areas, and then we would be returning with potential zone map changes, any general plan revisions that the commission may provide feedback on, as well as the commercial use and development standards in December. That concludes staff's presentation. I'm available for questions.
All right, so I think what we'll do with this is see if we have any questions of staff, then we'll take public comment, then we'll come back to deliberation and answering your specific questions. So at this point, do we have any questions of staff, sort of round one here?
Chair Hoffman, excuse me, Chair Peterson. It's hard to break old habits. In our December meeting, will we see the actual effect of the overlays that we just talked about? So for example, the housing element overlay allows residential on second story in C2 and C3 areas along PCH. So will we see some kind of a actual overlay that indicates that?
Yes, that will be shown on the map. It is currently in place, though.
Okay. That's my only question right now.
All right, Commissioner Hirsch?
Is one of the intentions of this update to consolidate the housing element overlay into new zoning code, or will those still have very specific requirements per the sites that were identified through the housing element?
The intent would be for that to be maintained as a separate implementation tool, and that any future rezoning would actually be in the base zoning, incorporating those standards there.
Just a random question. Who creates the map for the coastal zone? Is it the city or another agency?
In terms of the boundary,
Yeah.
that comes from the Coastal Commission. In terms of the jogs, or is that what's caught your attention? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is not set by the city. That is based on, I believe there's an average mean high tide and geographic features. There's no consistency, I will say, along the coast of California and where it jogs.
Thank you. That's all my questions for now.
Okay. Commissioner Hoffman? No. No? Okay. Commissioner Flaherty, do you have any questions at this time before we take public comment?
Yes, referring to the coastal overlay zone, right now, I'm looking at the document called Draft Coastal Overlay Zone. I don't see any difference from what we are currently having in this document right here.
You are correct in terms of the boundary. There is no change at this time. I think this overlay makes it more apparent. Currently, you will only see the easternmost boundary of it.
Right.
And then this is also in anticipation that when we do receive or move forward with a local coastal program, we would expect subsequent changes to this overlay, just based on coastal's, the processes that will come into place. So we will be expecting that there will be a tiering system where some portions of property in the coastal zone will remain within the coastal jurisdiction, and we will need to have basically a tiered system within this overlay. So this is setting us up for future amendments as well.
If indeed the coastal board sends a new changes, does the public have input at this, or do they have to go to coastal zone to fight that? As we illustrated our frustration with state interference.
In terms of the boundary, so yes, in terms of the boundary, that there will be public hearings when we get to that point before the Coastal Commission. That would be their jurisdiction to determine what the final boundaries are, and they may change. That's always a possibility.
Has there been any indication?
At this point, no. I've had no conversations about that.
Thank you. What's the other thing? I'm good for right now, thank you.
Chair Peterson, if I could just piggyback, as long as
You bet.
most of us have the draft coastal overlay zone up, whether it's staff or whether it's Commissioner Flaherty, can someone give me a history on why the area around Morningside on 31st through 32nd and Longfellow is not part of the coastal zone? I'm delighted that it's not. I'm not asking that it be included, but I'm just curious on how that carve-out
We're in
happened.
R1.
Pardon?
We're in R1 and we're surrounded by R2s. So,
Which has no consistency
But-
with the rest of the city.
right, but it just so happens that that stretch that I happen to live in isn't all R1. And it just so happened, just immediately outside the white area and into the green are R2s. Just a
So
coincidence.
if we recommended to the city council that the entire city of Hermosa be rezoned from R3 and R2 to R1, we could escape the clutches of the coastal
No,
zone?
I'm not saying that, but I'm
I'm
just
just
saying
asking.
it's just an ironic little stab in that area. It's the same way as the valley. The valley is all R1 too.
But so is
Thank you,
much
Chair.
of the Strand that is part of this. So
Mm-hmm.
there's no consistency, no logic at all.
Well, isn't the coastal overlay zone defined by some interpretation of, I'll say, high tide plus X number of feet, or like, what is the coastal zone? What there should be, I'm assuming there's some strict criteria as opposed to sort of legislative horse trading, although you're smiling.
So this is based on the California Coastal Commission. There is a mean high tide to, I don't know if Director Tai knows exactly what it is, but there's like varying geographic features, and or city attorney may have a better.
Correct. So it's defined in the Coastal Act, the 30103. It's kind of lengthy, but it's typically, excuse me, extending sea, obviously from Oregon to Mexico, 100 yards from the mean high tide line of the sea, and significant coastal estuaries, habitats, and recreational areas that extends inland to the first major ridge line, or 5 miles from the mean high tide line, or in developed urban areas, the zone generally extends inland less than 1,000 yards. There's a whole process they have to go through. They have to produce it on a certain size map, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, so there's some reasonably objective criteria that,
No.
okay. There's a
I would say there's criteria.
There's a defined criteria.
It could have been Valley Drive they chose, and that would have been a straight line, but they didn't. So
All right, I'm obviously naive to the ways of coastal zones. Anyway, all right, if we don't have any other questions, I'd love to take public comment. Do we have any commenters that have a brisk 3 minutes of, all right, come on up. We'll be in chambers, and I think we'll go to Zoom if anyone's there. If you could sign in and state your name, though I know it.
John David, yes, everybody knows that, I think. First of all, since I'm up here, I want to thank Carrie for everything you've done. You've spent a lot of time with me personally. You've explained a lot, so I just want to say you'll be missed by me, and I appreciate everything. So I think that was the most important thing I have to say today. The zoning is really connected to economic development. So a lot of what I'm going to speak about right now is that. In order for our downtown to thrive, I really think we need the experiential footprint of Hermosa Beach, of the downtown, to expand. It shouldn't just be about this small little area at the plaza there. We need to give people a reason to come to Hermosa Beach. So for this reason, I'd like to see the FARs for the recreational and for the community commercial to be closer aligned. So I'm going to recommend bringing the FARs up to 1.75 in the community commercial as well. The FARs, they're not really needed to preserve our character. We have a 30-foot height limit. I don't think anybody drives by a building and says that's a 1.25, that's a 1, or that's a 1.75. So I just think it's an unnecessary constraint, and we need investment downtown, and we need it throughout the downtown. The other thing is, I love the idea. I know I've advocated quite a bit for mixed use. I love the idea of mixed use throughout our downtown. I do think we need more feet on the street. I think the investment is necessary. I also think that it's going to be very hard to get those RENA numbers, especially from mixed use in our downtown. So the more hooks you have in that water, the more likely you are to produce some housing, and I think it's very important and shouldn't be overlooked. And I think that's kind of it. So thank you.
All right, thank you, John. Does anyone else in chambers wish to speak on this topic? If you could introduce yourself, name and town, I'd appreciate it.
Hello, Laura Pena. First of all, Carrie, I want to say that it has been a pleasure working with you. Even though we've gone back and forth, you have always been respectful, professional, and thank you so much for your service. I just couldn't go without saying that. Now let's get down to business. I was surprised by this meeting. I am on the notification list for the zoning updates, and the chamber has a municipal zoning code committee that wasn't able to convene because they didn't get notification of this meeting. So I'd kind of like to know how far in advance do we get notice? We haven't had a meeting in 3.5, 4 months since June. And it was my understanding that when we had the business category uses, that they were kind of out of context because we didn't have the land use. And some of the commissioners are new. And so I thought that was all going to be brought back together because I think we need to look at this comprehensively. The question that staff is asking, are there locations that do not align with the vision and should they be updated? Absolutely. But I think we need to look at creating a diversified business mix within our downtown. And when you ask anybody, let's go meet somewhere in downtown, they don't necessarily think they're going to one place. They look at it cohesively. And so I think there are issues with creating certain designations and certain delineations because it creates a fragment experience for our residents, for our visitors. If you look at what is a downtown, what's its purpose, it's supposed to be an economic center. It's supposed to be the economic heart of our city. And so I think we need to foster that sense of community and have a more cohesive foot traffic flow. It's supposed to be a tourism attraction. We recently have been looking at data in the chamber that shows that we do have people coming to our town. But guess what? They don't stay here. They don't stay here very long. So how can we change that? And I think the Planning Commission, it would be good if you could look at this data too, because how can we create the traffic flow so that our visitors, our residents have places to stay and go? We have learned recently that we don't know what businesses are going to look like in the future. But one of the things we do know is that people like experiences. If you look at our neighboring cities, the Point, people like going there because there's lots of things to do. Manhattan Village, same thing. We need to create that here. We need to give people a reason to come, to stay, to shop, to congregate. And I think looking at data would be incredibly important. I thank you for your feedback, and I look forward to more discussions.
All right, thank you, Laura. Anyone else in chambers wishing to speak? Welcome, Adam.
Hello, everybody. Adam Malavani. First of all, Carrie, I want to say thank you for your service, and I appreciate you were put in a difficult situations. Perhaps sometimes we were told to follow the rules, and that's not your fault, that some of the rules may be outdated or don't make a lot of sense in the first place. So I know we butted heads a little bit on that, but thank you for your service. So as many of you know, I've been, as others have been advocating to make it easier and less expensive to apply for and obtain permits for the temporary minor special events here in Hermosa. There are a handful of restrictions related to that permit that many of us think need to be changed. Number one, you can't use more than 10% of a private parking lot for an event. Two, you can only do 4 events per year in a 6-month period, even though the current permit allows each event to be up to 7 days. There's confusing issues regards to if the event is related or unrelated, and nobody seems to know what that means. And if you want to change a date, maybe because it looks like it's going to rain, you not only have to pay the full $650 permit again, in fact, you have to pay double because it's inevitably less than 30 days in advance. So these changes that I've mentioned, and there are others, have been supported by the majority of this commission, City Council, the Chamber, the Zoning Code Advisory Group, and other businesses like Uncorked, Ryla, ET Surf, and a few others that have private parking lots that would like to be able to do occasionally minor special events. So when I brought this issue up in January, I was told it would be addressed in May or June, and go in front of the Planning Commission, and that it would be included with the bigger project of the review of the zoning code and municipal codes, because that was a more efficient way to do it. And I understand there may be more important, higher priority issues, but my suggestion is that we pull this one small issue out of this much larger project, because I think this is a low-hanging fruit that could have an immediate benefit to not only the businesses, but the community at large. And we could easily make these changes in very little time. In fact, the amount of time that we've already spent before this commission, a couple meetings, a long presentation, a lot of time by the city staff on this issue, we could have already made these changes. So I'd also like to offer that we could, the citizens that are, this affects, this permit, that we could put together an advisory group specifically on this one issue, and we could report back to you probably in a week. Another issue that I recommend that we change is the process. So in Hermosa, if you...
Adam, I need you to wrap it up a little bit.
All right, I won't get into
Give it a little
that.
leeway.
So
I know you have a lot of
anyway,
ideas.
Thank you for your time.
Okay. Thank you. And anyone else in chambers wishing to speak? Seeing none, is there anyone on Zoom that wants to weigh in?
We're checking.
Okay.
No hands are raised.
All right. So we have taken public comment on this. I know that there's no formal action or decision being made here tonight. I know that staff had certain very specific questions that they wanted us to address. So if you want to flash those up there, maybe we can go through those one by one, and maybe that's too regimented, but it's not a bad start. I will just note while we're filling timer, I appreciate what Adam's saying. I don't know all the ins and outs of the very specific milestones that have to be hit and scheduling and that, but I appreciate his efforts to bring some richness to our downtown, or just generally. Everyone knows I'm a huge fan of, music, street music, whatever, kind of smaller events, et cetera. So anything that we can do in that regard to sort of strip it out of this big super tanker of zoning changes, I think would be helpful. And how that exactly that's affected, I don't know, but I just want to share that thought with staff. All right, one of the questions was, are there land use designations that do not align with the vision and location and should be updated? Does anyone have thoughts on that? I mean, I'll weigh in on this. I think one of the challenges, I think back on this, I'm in my 9th year on Planning Commission, and we went through plan and then working through zoning. At the same time, we've had some staffing challenges of turnover on top of the Skechers building, the big hotel, all of the many state laws and stops and starts. So it has taken a while. It's been a lot. I don't know that from my perspective, the vision has changed in that. I think we've had a lot of help from our relatives up in Sacramento about things we can and can't do. But I personally don't see any land use designation specific to the high level of the plans filtering down to zoning that change to your question, but I'll ask my colleagues what their thoughts are.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
I fall in the same camp, but if someone asks a question like that, does that mean that someone does have an idea that there may not be a alignment of overlay? I mean, if this came from staff, is there some concern that we do not have some alignment?
No, I think this was in response to our meeting in June, in which I think it had been a significant amount of time since you guys have looked at the general plan land use. So in part, this was to bring back those foundational documents, but there was some questions about these key locations because just looking at the name Gateway without the definition, there was some concern, like, is that really appropriate for the location at Pier and PCH? And so we wanted to revisit those, and if you're feeling that they, as they're defined, they are okay, that's not a problem. But we didn't want to keep moving forward without having a check-in with all of you, because there has been a significant amount of time since original adoption, and there may be some rethinking. So we, you know, if everything is fine the way it is, that is great. We did hear one public comment about FAR. I'd be curious to know how the commission feels about that, if there's any direction area.
Well, in response, I was perhaps part of that conversation because I was not here for all the extensive discussion that was held by citizens and the various commissions for the development plan Hermosa. So I'm coming in literally 5 to 8 years after a lot of time was spent coming up with these designations. But you know, I look at the term community commercial versus gateway, and gateway to me means where you enter somewhere. So I'm not sure why the Mitsubishi place is designated community commercial as opposed to gateway. And I'm not sure why Vaughn's and CVS are gateway when they're smack in the middle of the city, but that's just me, and that's 7 years after a lot of people worked long and hard to come up with those geographic designations and assign them to certain, or those designations and then assign them to certain geographic areas. So I think I was part of that conversation.
I mean, as I look at the map, some of it, it's a combination of sort of literal gateway, and some of it is just the size of the plot and what it can do, right? I mean, to me, making that right turn off of PCH onto Pier is a bit of a gateway, not literally a city boundary, but part of it is also just the size of the plot and what could be done with it.
The PCH property on our southern boundary, half of that car lot is in Redondo. So I see it difficultly having some sort of a gateway program there on the half of that lot that's in Hermosa. I look at other gateway issues at being at aviation as we enter Hermosa as a gateway property area. I know that there was a big effort on the team in planning to get the sign on PCH at the new Skechers property as they enter into Hermosa. And I think there's other ways to do gateway, and I'm not talking about signage, I'm talking about, you know, cooperation with a property type of thing. My other issues is that I know there's been pressure for us to deal with expanding the commercial residential use on Upper Pier Avenue and maybe even Lower Pier Avenue, but there's been an existing commercial residential use on Pier Avenue and Hermosa Avenue for 75 to 80 years, and then on PCH for at least that length of time too. So the south end of PCH has more commercial residential properties today than any other place in the city from Pier Avenue south. I think we should at least, I'd like to take Adam up on some of those issues that he's talking about, and maybe take some input from them in a written form. They deposit it with the department, and we can have at least a subject matter we can talk about, comparing their wishes with existing ordinance. At least there's a start on something like that. I like your whole approach for all the issues. Stay away from my R1 zone up in the 31st Street, thank you very much. But other than that, I'm ready to take on anything that the department feels that we should address. I would only want, because the subject matter sometimes involves, like some of the, in years past, there were 100 to 200 pages of documents that we had to review. If there's any way that we can maybe process the documents to us more than just, I know the staff works hard, maybe we skip a meeting once we have the documents, skip a whole meeting in between. Maybe that's too much lead time. But some of these issues could be multi-page documents that we'd like to review. Other than that, I'm ready for anything that you guys propose, that's for sure.
Just a quick question. I know Pete has some comments as well, but are we hung up on the word gateway? Like, was that even the best choice of words? Or
That was,
Yeah,
again,
okay.
now you're looking at my notes.
My peripheral
response to
vision
that
is terrible. So,
is this is a nomenclature kind of a thing. This notion of a sense of arrival was part of what was intended to be part of that when you're coming down PCH, I'm not sure that most folks do know when they've left one city the other, but they know when they turn on Pier Avenue that they have entered Hermosa Beach. The other issue relates, as Dave and Mike said, to the size of the particular properties and the opportunities that they present in that case, and the kind of ironic situation of a split lot that might otherwise be a gateway because of the fact that it's really in two different cities, probably doesn't fit. So I think once the definition of what is permitted there, that list is developed, or not the list, but the description of what's permitted, it'll make way more sense than to just assume that gateway means literally and figuratively that somehow you're going to have that arch that says, "Welcome to Hermosa."
all right. I'll just, so I think we've sort of covered this question. I know you have a few other questions, but before we leave this much debated slide, I think to me, the general comment, it's always like trying to go from the very specifics of a high-level document with FARs and this and that to something that someone wants to build and they can or they can't because of that some years down the road. That's always a challenge for lowly planning commissioners to kind of visualize, page 23 of a document. What does that mean for a reasonable request from a builder or not? So that's our 8-hour day. All right, so on to the next question.
Oops.
Back to. Okay, so to your questions, so non-inventory sites mean ones that are not in the RENA. Should residential uses only be allowed above the ground floor? I don't wish to see residential uses on the ground floor in our downtown, and that's just me.
Nor do I.
Okay.
I agree.
I agree.
I agree.
Okay. And I've been tough on office space, although to no effect. I think as we kind of hollow out our retail space, it has a lot of implications. And are there other areas that should have the same objective development standard applied? What are we driving at there?
The same requirement. Are there other areas, corridors in the city where you would want to see residential only permitted above ground floor? So I don't know, along Aviation, for example. I don't know that there is. It's just, would you want that sort of standard placed upon residential uses in any other commercial corridors where it's permitted?
Chair, I thought that and maybe my thoughts are incomplete on this, I thought as part of the housing overlay, that's what this planning commission voted for. Within the C2 and C3 zones, residential permitted on the second floor or above, but not on the first floor. Is that not part of our housing overlay?
That would only apply to the
So it is,
specific zoning, right?
it is introduced in the general plan. However, I do not believe that standard is incorporated into the housing element overlay. If I misspeak, Gary, please correct me, but I believe on those housing element inventory sites, we can't restrict the ground floor from incorporating residential into it.
So, yeah, that's correct. So under state law, the housing element sites, if you allow mixed use, you also have to allow 100% residential. That's just a state law that governs your housing element sites inventory sites. And so that's why those have to be kept under a separate overlay so that you can have a more meaningful discussion on the other sites based on what the local jurisdiction feels is most appropriate. But yes, the housing element sites are kind of on their own animal because they were qualified by state regulations, but they all are also governed by certain state regulations.
Okay.
So-
But just to kind of cut to the chase, if I'm understanding your question correctly, so staff is asking beyond what the state is requiring us to, should we expand ground floor residential in commercial zones beyond that? And I think the consensus of the group is no, we should not.
Correct. No, we should not.
Downtown, and I would add aviation or any other commercial corridor. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I think I got to the core of the question.
So let me just make sure I totally understand. If we have a commercial site up on aviation or PCH that is not part of the housing overlay, we're saying in that situation, we do not want to allow residential on the ground floor, but where we have the housing overlay in the C2 and C3 zone, we have already prohibited housing on the ground floor and can only be on the second floor. For example,
The opposite.
pardon?
The opposite.
Carrie? I know it's impolite to point, but
No. No, on the housing element sites, ground floor residential is not prohibited. In fact, the city cannot prohibit it because under state law, for your housing element site, if you allow it to be developed mixed use, you also have to allow it to be developed as 100% residential if the property owner comes in and applies for it. And I think there are some qualifications among that, but in general, we have to be prepared that 100% residential has to be allowed.
So is this 100% residential, but only units that would sell for a person who could afford them for low or moderate?
Not necessarily, no.
So are we saying right now, the JAMA space up on PCH, that could be developed 100% residential if someone wanted to do that?
Under certain is that one I think is on the housing element site. So yes, under certain qualifications, yes.
Boy, my memory's not what it used to be.
Yeah, it's just state law governs the housing element sites in a specific way to ensure that they really are facilitated to meet the city's RENA.
Well, I guess I'm going to ask my fellow commissioners, what discussions did we have 6 months or a year ago where I, for some reason, came away with mistaken impression that the housing element overlay that we were going to allow residential in the C2, C3 zones, but only if it was low to moderate housing on the second floor? I mean, go ahead and tell me, I'm 100% wrong on my memory. What was the discussion we had?
I mean, I think we're going beyond the scope of tonight's discussion.
I agree. I'm
And
sorry.
understood. No, and so I think what we did, I'll say somewhat grudgingly to meet state law. But to the staff's question, do we want to go beyond that? And what I'm hearing is we don't. And maybe if staff could send us some, meeting minutes or discussion points, or at least point us out to the specific meeting where we discussed all this, because it's confusing as heck to
Yeah, that's,
our commissioners.
Chair, you're right. We're straying far from it. And, but yeah, I would appreciate some clarification of refreshing my obviously impaired memory.
Well, this stuff is really complicated, and you know that you were talking about this because people sort of like stare up at the ceiling and go like, well, I think you're right. You see the looks as we try to recreate what's transpired. So I think we've debated this slide. Do we have other
I have a,
questions? Or I'm sorry if I didn't. Go ahead.
yeah, I have a question
one.
for, I guess, my fellow commissioners, and it relates back to the first slide, but it came up in my mind as we started talking about our perspective on whether we are interested in allowing housing on the ground floor of the commercial areas. It sounds like we're all in alignment that no, we don't. We want to preserve the retail. But then I look at the Plan Hermosa, and I see a good amount of properties that are zoned residential on PCH are medium density and high density, and logically that makes sense to me because those are currently medium density and high density residential. But they have residential on the first floor adjacent to commercial buildings that we're saying should not have residential on the first floor. So I'm wondering if we're just comfortable with that because that's just what it's always been and we're just going to preserve that, or what is, our other reasoning and justification for keeping that stretch of PCH residential?
My response would be it was a historic mistake, but to change it to what would be correct would make all of those properties non-conforming, and that brings in a whole different set of problems for the owners and for the property owners. Ideally, from my perspective, we would have never had or residential all in the north end of town on PCH.
It's strange to say also, interesting that somebody would have the multi-million-dollar residential on the north end of PCH that has developed over the past 10 years that used to be small cottages and so on and so forth, and now are large units. So you're right. I think historically, when they allowed in commercial anything, whether it was R1 or R2 or commercial, that's how those buildings developed downtown and on PCH. So you're right. The zone has changed, though. It doesn't allow it now, but did back then. So do we want to reinvent the wheel and allow commercial/residential, not only in the existing area, but in new areas? That's what I see coming at us as a question.
Yeah, and I guess my perspective is I agree. I think we should try and preserve retail on the ground floor. I see this conflict on the map that we're just not addressing, but I think it's for good reason. It's historic context into how the city's been developed. I just wanted to flag it for discussion.
We could look at that in the context of the mixed-use overlay, too.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, and specific to that, the overall vision of our city is to be the best little beach city, a walkable town, a 10-minute city, however you want to say it. And so directionally preserving retail where we can to allow that is a worthy goal, in my opinion. Have we answered all of your questions?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, I'm going to. So, Chair, as long as we're talking about commercial site uses, let me introduce this question because I realize that the City Council has dealt with this before and was not able to come to a consensus, but do we want to tackle the issue of whether or not pure office uses should be allowed on the first floor in community commercial, downtown, and recreational commercial? Now, if it's a service thing, such as, a law office or people providing hair salons or nails, those are fine. But a pure 100% office, for the future, do we want to allow new pure first floor office uses in those three zones that I just mentioned?
Good question. I'm not sure. I mean, perhaps that's something that we can agendize for another meeting. I mean,
That'll have to be addressed when we come up to the definition of what the classification of uses could be.
right.
It's interesting, you juxtapose the law office, for example, with a salon, has a very different kind of appeal and pattern to, to the pedestrian. Somebody walk in and get their nails done, but I don't think anybody pops in to get their, their truss done.
I think they do. I think there's foot traffic. I'm thinking of the pure office building. We have some valued businesses in town.
Oh, and I'm not arguing against it. No, I mean,
Yeah.
you've got a number of sites, the Marlin Equity and now
That's what I'm thinking.
Nolan's business. You've got office buildings that are full of people who presumably are that, if we're advocating that somehow people living upstairs create foot traffic, so do people that work there. And without knowing, the danger that I see is that if we paint ourselves into a list of uses that is so restrictive and say, well, we got to allow only shoe stores and retail uses, who's bought shoes in a local, I just got shoes come from Amazon like everything else in the world.
Chair, again, I would agree. This is a conversation for another time, but I would urge my fellow commissioners that we should have this as a discussion item to make a decision.
Yeah.
Part of the definition of what the classifications are, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that should be part of our conversations. I've had concerns for years about, just generically speaking without getting into extreme definitions, but of ground floor office and what that does to the vibrancy of the town. But it hasn't penetrated through to city council. But to me, that's worthy of discussion. Any other thoughts on this item? No? Okay. So we have given feedback, provide discussion to staff. So the next look at this will be when? Are we going to look at this every meeting or every other meeting until we're done? Or what's the?
So we will be back in December. I think we're going to have to probably alternate to give us time to turn things around.
Yeah, no.
And if we can pick up the pace, we will certainly do so.
Okay, understood. We appreciate it. Yeah, it'd be good to get this done. All right.
Mr. Chair, can I ask one more
absolutely.
question?
You bet.
One of our speakers tonight spoke of possibly bringing in that permit issue. Is there some way that could be at least agendized in a short term versus a long term? Is there some reason why we shouldn't be addressing it at this level? Or are we prioritizing other things?
Is that us or is that city council?
Right.
And I think it's.
So this did go to the city council, and the direction at that time was to incorporate it into the overall update in order to prioritize the bigger update and based on the resources that are available to get everything done.
All right. I mean, if that's the direction from council, that's the direction from council. Just noting that people that want to do events, I mean, they run by the seasons, and if we lose the summer, lose the spring, that's a bummer. So anyway, if there's a way for council to reconsider that, that would be our wish, I believe. All right, I think we're done with item 8A, which brings us to item 8B, which is Community Development Director report. And I believe you do have some thoughts for us.
I do. Thank you. I don't know how to say this. I think, as everybody knows, this is my last day with the city of Hermosa Beach. And I just wanted to thank my staff, thank the Community Development Department, the Planning Commission, the City Council, and the members of the public for being such an engaged and supportive group in the mission that the department has to take on. In the 21 months I was with the city, we took on a lot. And, I think we talk a lot about the housing element, but housing is something that affects every single person, period. And to advance the city's most significant housing plan for the next 8 years was a big lift. And I think that was single-handedly everybody's largest accomplishment. But with that completed, I'm really happy that, we have made strides to pick up the zoning code update again. But, I will say that's not the be-all and end-all of all the things that we did in those 21 months. There was a lot, and I'm not going to go down the list tonight, but we cleaned up a lot of things that were long overdue, and we re-established a lot of the internal processes that needed to be restructured. We restaffed the department, and so I want to say it's been an incredibly gratifying experience here, and a big part of that is working with, one of the most thoughtful, knowledgeable, and compassionate planning commissions that I've ever had the pleasure of working with. First of all, you get along, which I think is great. But you're collegial, you're supportive, you support each other, and you all come from different perspectives. And speaking on behalf of the staff, it really helps us in the development of policy and ideas that we bring to the commission. And so we appreciate the fact that you do dive into all the back pages, the red line documents, the government codes. We really appreciate that. And, I know our former commissioner, Marie Rice, I would be remiss if I didn't mention her because, she set the tone for me when I got here. And that level of precision is something I think has permeated through the way everybody works. But that's the level, what is it? The devil's in the details. And it takes all of those details to make good future policy. And I hope that that in the last 21 months, I've helped the city, in that little spot of time, do that for the future. And so I just wanted to express my appreciation for you being an extraordinary commission, Alexis and her staff for being an extraordinary planning staff, Mel for being the fearless, organizer of all things, superhero, and then for us to have a supportive city council and community that's helped us get all this work done. So I wanted to start off by just saying thank you. The second thing I will do is my traditional update, which is I will update you on what the city council did at the last meeting. The city council heard a de novo public hearing for the Lot D project, and after substantial discussion, upheld the Planning Commission's approval of the precise development plan. I think there were a couple of different areas of clarification, and talk about the adjacent property accessing the parking lot, but ultimately did uphold the Planning Commission's decision. So I think that was good. And the other thing, it was sort of a bit of an interesting item. It was on consent, but the Planning Commission may be aware of the the community center is a historic landmark. And one of the provisions in the city's historic preservation ordinance is that if there's a public safety issue with a portion of the building that might affect some kind of historical exterior element, that public safety, the public safety reason can represent a reason to certify that that item is not subject to certificate of appropriateness, which is usually the process by which historic buildings are reviewed. And so the city council had it, we put it on the consent calendar item, but there are these slatted windows over at the community center that, you know, it's a target for break-ins and things like that. And so we were able to get a certification that those slatted windows could be replaced with solid ones when the time comes, when Public Works gets to it, but that wouldn't be subject to a historical review. And so I thought I would mention that because of the Planning Commission's involvement in historical buildings and the visibility of the community center. So that was the city council item. And then moving forward, for future meetings, planning manager Oropeza will be taking the seat of the director, and she'll run the meetings. I will say she has extensive experience sitting at planning commission meetings. She, in her former role as zoning administrator for Long Beach, was required to attend every single planning commission meeting for however many number of years that she worked there. So she is absolutely well-versed and qualified, and you are in very good hands. So with that, I thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to serve as your Planning Commission liaison, and thank you.
Well, thank you. I'll say on behalf of all of us, although I'm sure my colleagues have comments too, we just really appreciate it. I personally very much appreciate working with you. Your professional competence, your sense of humor, you're just fun to work with, and that helps to move things forward. And I think working in all of this requires a degree of optimism, but also sort of, perspective on how projects go, et cetera. So we wish you the best. We will miss you, and I'm sure my colleagues have a few thoughts as well. But anyway, it's been a fun ride and ending sooner than we'd like, but we wish you well.
What do they say about when you buy a boat, the happiest day is the day you get it and the day you get rid of it? Whatever the opposite of that is the case here. I was so pleased when you came and we finally, I thought, had the stability and the continuity and the expertise that we have been missing, in a sense, since Kenny left. And now, unfortunately, we're back in that same situation. But everything Dave said is true. Been a pleasure working with you. I apologize for my cynicism and sarcastic manner when it was unintended to be offensive, but thank you, and we wish you the very best in the future, but we'll always be indebted for what you did for our city, so thank you.
Well, I'm not stealing his notes tonight because even though we're saying the same thing, I think you've been an excellent director. You certainly are personable enough, and I was proud that we stole you from Manhattan Beach. That was my first joy. So that being said, I wish you luck on everything else you do. So thank you.
Well, I have just really appreciated getting to know you and working with you over this past year. I think, I was fortunate to step into the seat after you were already here. So came in with a lot of really thoughtful and good guidance on how to fill the seat. And I think that the way that you and the staff presents the materials to us is very clear and concise. I appreciate that you guys really hear us and take our feedback and incorporate that into the documents that just make our city better. I appreciate and also worry about the hole that is coming and the work that it's going to put on us in order to make sure that, the things that you have established continue throughout the process. because, you know, I'm surprised to hear it's only been 21 months. I can't believe how much work that you've gotten done in the time that you've been here. I think it's really impressive. I think it's been a huge benefit to the city, and we are going to miss you. So thank you for all of your hard work, and good luck on your next endeavor.
Carrie, I would, so as not to prolong this meeting, I absolutely echo all the comments by my fellow commissioners. I'll just sum it up by saying I'll miss you both professionally and personally.
All right. Moving on to, I guess, item 9, Planning Commission comments, if we have other comments. Mike, yes?
I had a lot of comments about ADUs and stuff, but obviously this is the wrong moment to talk about those. So
Pass that agenda item.
you can be excused, and we'll deal with that the next time around.
It's not open mic, but it's
That's right.
relevant commission comments. Anything that
I
for
do
future
have
agenda items, et
something.
cetera. Yeah.
I want to welcome and hope that all can attend. On November 11th, the city of Hermosa Beach is celebrating the 30th anniversary of our Veterans Memorial on the community center lawn. We have a great program being established. Singers, bands, marching people, and everyone will get a pin and a special welcome. We have a wonderful keynote speaker who's several tours overseas, and she is a colonel, and she'll dazzle you with her speech. Other than that, we again, this is the 30th anniversary for this memorial, and I wish it starts on Monday, November 11th, Veterans Day, at 10:30 a.m. So I wish you all to come. Thank you.
Any commission comments? No. I'll just say I haven't been to all 30, but I've been to a few of those, and yeah, it's really a beautiful ceremony, and the time that the vets put together, take time to put that together. My dad was I didn't serve. My dad was a naval officer. I drank a lot of Shirley Temples at Allen Center on Terminal Island, when there's a Navy base out there. So I will be there. Any other planning commissioner comments? Commissioner Hirsch or Vice Chair Hirsch? All right, and then, I don't know why we have it separately, but, well, okay, here we go. Okay, so any agenda items, tentative future agenda as listed here. Do we need a motion to receive and file on that? That's one of my recurring questions.
We do not, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Noted here, trying to report coming back, 301 Pier Avenue, zoning code, TBD. I guess that's it. We have no further public comment needed. Is there someone that wishes a motion to adjourn?
So move.
All right. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right,
Aye.
thank you all. All right, good night.